The candlelight trembles against stone walls as a storm growls across the horizon. Inside the crumbling manor of Willow Creek, a dying man whispers a confession that no priest could absolve. His voice trembles, not from guilt, but from fear of what waits beyond. 13 graves lie behind the house, each marked only by crude wooden crosses. Everyone belongs to a man who once called him brother. This is not a story of love or betrayal. It's a story of vengeance, patient, methodical, and absolute. In a world ruled by pride and inheritance, where honor could be bought with blood, a single act of treachery would ignite a chain of retribution lasting more than a decade. Tonight, under the echo of thunder, the ghosts of Willow Creek return, not as shadows, but as men bound by justice, loyalty, and the unyielding promise of brotherhood. Because in a land where no law could punish evil, men had to become their own executioners. If stories of loyalty, justice, and revenge carved in blood move you, then stay. Hit that like button, subscribe for more true cinematic tales, and share this with someone who believes that brotherhood runs deeper than fear. What you're about to hear isn't legend. It's history rewritten by the hands of men who refuse to be forgotten. The river cut through the frontier like a scar of glass beneath the sun, reflecting a world built on men's sweat and unspoken promises. Everything along its banks smelled of iron, salt, and hunger. 3 men stood at the edge of that current, each believing he could bend it toward his will. They were bound not by friendship, but by the quiet mathematics of need and profit. Gareth Alden, the first, came from nothing but restless hunger. He'd lost his father to debt and his youth to the mills. The river offered him what land never could: movement and power. Beside him, Corvin Darrow carried the dignity of an older name worn thin by generations of failure. His family crest still hung in his office, but dust had replaced gold in every groove. The third, Silas Rowe, had once commanded river barges during the war years, steering men and cargo through storms and ambushes. The river had taken his youth and half his hearing, but left him cunning. Together, they built the Delta Company, trading in lumber, grain, and forged steel. What they truly sold was control. Control over routes, markets, and the tides that dictated survival across a lawless frontier. At first, their alliance felt like destiny. Gareth brought the fire, Corvin the influence, Silas the discipline. Each man's weakness was shielded by another's strength, a triangle of ambition sharp enough to cut time itself. Money flowed like rainwater after drought. The docks swelled with cargo and their warehouses hummed with noise and risk. The river whispered to them nightly, promising immortality through enterprise. But prosperity breeds blindness. Gareth began to believe the current bent for him alone. Corvin's debts returned with compound interest. Silas, watching both, kept silent while plotting his own contingencies. They met each evening in the counting room overlooking the harbor. Cigars glowed like small suns in the dimness, and their laughter echoed against ledgers that grew heavier with every deal. No one noticed when their conversations shifted, from dreams of expansion to quiet accusations about missing cargo, falsified tallies, and men paid twice for the same shipment. Suspicion moved between them like fog. Gareth dismissed it as paranoia. "Every empire breeds thieves," he said, pouring brandy. "Ours just happens to be built of them." Corvin's jaw tightened. Silas's eyes flicked toward the door, measuring exits. Weeks passed, and the first cracks appeared. A shipment vanished upriver, 30 barrels of gunpowder gone without trace. The insurance claim listed accident, but Silas knew accidents never signed receipts. Corvin began arriving late, smelling of whiskey and ink. He spoke of expansion toward the western deltas, but his proposals favored creditors more than partners. Gareth's temper, once a weapon, turned on allies. One night the argument spilled beyond the counting room. The docks slept under mist as the 3 men shouted beside crates stamped with their company's seal. Workers pretended deafness. Loyalty was safer that way. "You're bleeding us dry," Gareth snarled. Corvin's answer came low. "You mistake leadership for ownership." Silas stepped between them, the mediator again, though the knife in his pocket said otherwise. They settled with forced handshakes and a promise to meet the next morning. But promises were paper in the rain. Each man left thinking of the other two as obstacles, not brothers. Silas spent the night writing in a logbook no one had ever seen. He recorded debts owed, shipments rerouted, bribes paid. He called it insurance, though in truth it was ammunition. Corvin met a banker before dawn, pledging company assets for a private loan. The ink was barely dry before he realized the terms chained him tighter than any partnership ever had. Gareth rode to the mills upriver, meeting men who feared him enough to obey without question. He ordered expansions they couldn't afford and swore he'd double output before harvest. By the time he returned, the company's accounts were ghosts, entries shifting between books, profits dissolving in creative arithmetic. The delta that once flowed with gold now carried rot beneath its surface. Rumors spread downriver. Dockhands whispered that the three founders no longer spoke without weapons nearby. Merchants bet on which man would fall first. The river, as always, kept its secrets. One humid evening, lightning split the horizon while the partners gathered once more in that dim office. The air smelled of oil and betrayal. A storm outside mirrored the one inside. Gareth confronted them with evidence, ledgers marked with stolen coin, signatures that weren't his. Corvin laughed, half mad from guilt and liquor. Silas said nothing, watching both like a hunter measuring distance. The argument turned physical. Chairs crashed, papers flew, the window shattered from a stray blow. Outside, thunder swallowed their shouts, leaving only the rhythm of rain against broken glass. When silence finally came, one lamp remained lit. Beneath it, three bloodied men stared at the ledgers that had once promised empire. None spoke of friendship again. They signed a truce that night, a division of assets, routes, and territories. On paper, the Delta Company would survive. In truth, it had already drowned beneath their pride. Gareth left before dawn, his carriage cutting tracks through mud like scars. Corvin lingered, staring at the ledger until sunrise burned the ink red. Silas watched both depart, memorizing every detail. Weeks later, a barge caught fire mid-river. Witnesses said it carried steel. Others swore it carried men. The explosion painted the dawn crimson. Officially, it was deemed an accident. Unofficially, the Delta Company ceased to exist that morning. Gareth vanished inland, chasing new ventures. Corvin disappeared into city smoke. Silas inherited silence, the last captain of a sinking dream. But the river remembers. Every tide that rolled through the docks carried whispers of what had been lost. Brotherhood turned to ash, ambition twisted into ruin, loyalty traded for survival. Years later, men still spoke of the three who built the Delta. Not as heroes nor villains, but as a warning carved in current, that no fortune forged in mistrust can stand. For beneath every empire of men lies a ledger no one dares balance, a record kept by the river itself. And the river, unlike men, never forgets a debt unpaid. Silas knew this better than anyone. Each night he walked the wharf alone, hearing the ghosts of his partners in the creak of timbers, feeling the weight of choices heavier than anchors. Sometimes he imagined Gareth's laughter echoing from the dark water, or Corvin's voice whispering about legacy and pride. Each sound reminded him that brotherhood, once broken, drifts forever without shore. He tried to rebuild under new names, but every dockhand, every trader, remembered the brand burned into the crates, D.Co. It became shorthand for greed and doom whispered among crews. The river gave him one final gift, a mirror at sunset. In it he saw not wealth or empire, but the reflection of three men who had mistaken ambition for immortality and paid the price. As night claimed the horizon, Silas dropped his last ledger into the current. The pages spread like pale wings before sinking. "Take it," he murmured, "and remember what we were." The river swallowed the confession without judgment, carrying it toward the gulf where all secrets end. Behind him, the docks stood empty, awaiting the next generation of dreamers and fools. And so the story began, not with glory, but with ruin. Three men had built the delta. The delta had unmade them. The current kept flowing, indifferent, eternal, whispering their names into myth. Under the dim lantern light, the abandoned warehouse at the river's edge breathed like a beast, asleep, its walls sweating from the day's heat, while thunder gathered far off beyond the black marsh. Gareth Alden arrived first, his boots striking the floorboards in sharp, deliberate rhythm, the weight of a revolver pressing cold against his ribs, as if reminding him there would be no forgiveness tonight. He had chosen this place carefully, the same building where their fortunes had once been counted, where barrels of steel and timber had promised a future that now reeked of mold, dust, and failure. Corvin Darrow entered next, cloaked against the rain that had begun to fall, his face pale from exhaustion, his hands trembling not from fear, but from months of lies, finally catching up to him. Last came Silas Rowe, silent, as memory himself, eyes narrowed from decades of river storms, the smell of rope and oil clinging to him like a second skin forged by consequence. They had agreed to meet to settle accounts, nothing more, yet all three carried weapons hidden beneath coats, as though each already knew the arithmetic of betrayal would end in blood. The air was thick with ghosts, every corner echoing the hammering of dockmen long gone, the river's low moan crawling beneath the boards, whispering debts unpaid and brotherhood undone. A single bottle of bourbon stood on the table between them, unopened, its glass fogged with humidity symbol and warning, both of what pride and desperation could turn men into. Gareth broke the silence first, his voice steady but hollow. "You sold the contract, Corvin. You stole from the company that made us men. You traded our name for paper and whiskey." Corvin's laugh cracked like a match against flint. "You call it stealing, I call it surviving. You wanted an empire built on credit and lies. I merely collected the truth you buried." Silas remained still, listening, his jaw tightening around the weight of years, the flicker of the lantern cutting his face into halves, one calm, one prepared for violence. Rain began drumming the roof in relentless rhythm, like drummers at a burial march, thunder answering from far upriver, the warehouse trembling as if aware it was about to witness judgment. Gareth's hand drifted toward his coat, the motion slow, deliberate, his mind counting not seconds but heartbeats, as if timing could change destiny's pace once set in motion. Corvin saw the gesture, eyes narrowing, shoulders, stiffening, his own hand slipping toward the pocket where he kept his small knife, meant for ledgers, not flesh, but useful all the same. Silas finally spoke, his voice, gravel low. "Stop, both of you. The river's taken enough blood, it doesn't need more. You're fools letting pride speak louder than reason." Neither listened. The silence after his words carried more danger than shouting ever could. It was the silence of men who had already chosen ruin over surrender. The first gunshot shattered that silence, glass rained down from the high windows. The lantern swayed wildly, throwing shadows that moved like ghosts between the men still breathing. Corvin stumbled backward, clutching his side eyes wide with disbelief, not pain, the look of a man realizing he'd always known how this would end long before tonight. Gareth lowered the smoking revolver, his face lit by its brief firelight, a mixture of triumph and horror, twisting across him as if his soul couldn't decide which to keep. Silas lunged forward, knocking the weapon aside, fury boiling through decades of discipline, his hands finding Gareth's collar, dragging him toward the table strewn with the maps of their empire. "You killed him!" Silas growled, but Gareth spat back, "He killed himself with his greed!" The truth lost somewhere between them, drowned in thunder and the stench of smoke. Corvin's blood pooled beneath the table, creeping toward the cracks in the floor, a dark river seeking its larger brother outside while both men above ignored the tide's patience. Silas's fist connected with Gareth's jawbone, snapping like dry wood. Both men fell through a lattice of broken crate splinters, raining like punishment from the rafters above. The revolver skittered across the floor, its metal clinking faintly, before vanishing into darkness where neither dared reach, as if it had become an impartial god, deciding when to speak again. Gareth struck first, rising with a grunt, swinging a jagged board, his blow glancing off Silas's temple, stars exploding in the older man's vision replaced by the smell of iron. They grappled, wrestling through dust and sweat, each convinced the other was the devil wearing familiar skin, their breaths coming ragged, their hatred forged into something indistinguishable from sorrow. When the second shot came, no one could tell whose finger pulled the trigger. Its echo rolled through the building, then outward across the river like thunder answering thunder. Silas collapsed, knees giving way, his coat blooming dark, his eyes fixed on the rafters where water dripped steadily from a stormhole above, marking each second of fading life. Gareth knelt beside him, blood staining his hands, though he no longer knew whose it was, whispering something between apology and prayer words stolen by rain before they reached heaven. Outside, lightning split the sky, revealing the delta spread wide and merciless, a map of all their ambition, now drowned beneath the same flood that once carried their fortune. He dragged both bodies to the center of the floor, arranging them almost tenderly, as if by restoring symmetry he could erase the chaos that had brought him here. Then he gathered every ledger, every record, every name they'd written into history, and fed them to the fire, watching ink curl like snakes and paper scream as it burned. The flames painted his face gold and red, reflections of everything he'd gained and lost, merging into one relentless truth that empire built on deceit always demands equal payment. When the last page turned to ash, Gareth stood over it, all shoulders shaking, not from grief, but exhaustion, the realization that even victory left a man hollowed. He walked out into the storm coat, plastered to his skin, the river's roar meeting him like applause or accusation, impossible to tell which carried more truth. By dawn, the warehouse was nothing but smoke and embers, the river reclaiming what remained, swallowing names, dreams, and blood, until only rumor floated across its surface. Dockhands would later whisper of the night lightning killed 3 men, though only 2 bodies were found, and one shadow kept walking upstream, forever seeking absolution. The Delta Company became legend, a story told in taverns of men who built an empire, then drowned in it, each listener finding pieces of himself in their downfall. Years later, strangers found the site overgrown, the foundations buried under reeds, yet on storm nights, lantern lights still flickered there, shaped like 3 silhouettes, unmoving, eternal. And when wind cut across the water, sailors swore they heard voices arguing beneath the thunder, not curses nor pleas, but the unfinished conversation of men who once called each other brother. That night at the warehouse became the measure by which betrayal was judged, a tale every young trader learned by heart, whispered warning that trust costs more than gold ever will. Some said Gareth Alden survived changing names, vanishing inland, carrying guilt like a relic. Others claimed the river took him claiming balance where the law could not reach. But every man who passed the old Delta docks felt the same cold wind, the same unspoken memory of what pride and greed carve into those who forget brotherhood's weight. And thus ended the first reckoning of the Delta, not with justice nor redemption, but with silence heavy enough to drown even the loudest ghosts beneath its unbroken tide. The river towns rebuilt slowly, boards hammered over old scars, new men walking the same docks their fathers once ruled. Every echo of hammer or oar carried the weight of unfinished confessions and restless ghosts. They called themselves the sons of the Delta, not by blood, but by memory. Inheritors of debts no coin could settle. Each carried a version of the story shaped by rumor and loss. Some sought truth through ledgers left behind, ink faded but legible enough to reveal greed in its purest mathematics. Others searched the ruins for something less tangible, dignity buried beneath deceit. Among them was Halen Rowe, son of the last captain, quiet as fog and twice as patient. He listened more than he spoke, measuring men by silence rather than boasts. Beside him worked Oren Darrow, a craftsman of words and iron, grandson of the man whose pride had burned the warehouse. He hammered guilt into metal and called it purpose. They met on a morning drowned in mist when the river smelled of smoke again, though no fire burned. Halen said only, "It's starting over," and Oren nodded without question. Their plan was not vengeance, but excavation. They would recover what truth remained and build something cleaner from its bones, a harbor for those who'd known betrayal's taste but refused its afterlife. The old wharf keeper, Elias, warned them the river forgets no name. He'd seen men chase ghosts until their reflections answered back. Halen smiled faintly. "Then we'll learn to listen better." They began collecting fragments, letters, maps, trade seals, piecing together the network that once stretched from inland mills to distant ports. Each discovery felt like lifting a stone from a shared grave. At night they gathered in a candlelit loft, pages spread across floorboards like a mosaic of shame. The wind rattled shutters, making their whispers sound like prayers half-remembered. Oren read aloud an entry signed in his grandfather's hand, numbers marching beside names of ships long gone. His voice faltered, but Halen finished it for him with calm precision. "Their sin wasn't trade," Halen said softly. "It was forgetting who they served. The river feeds everyone until you try to own it." Silence answered, heavier than agreement. By the third month, the reconstruction had become a movement. Dockmen, carpenters, and clerks joined, drawn by the promise of rebuilding an honest port free from the rot of their father's greed. No one spoke of revenge anymore. Instead, they spoke of balance, of learning the rhythm between taking and giving back. The work itself became confession, sweat turning remorse into structure. Storms tested them. Each flood carried away half-finished docks and records inked with sleepless nights. Yet each time the waters fell, they began again, stubborn as memory, refusing erasure. Elias watched from his shack, muttering that the river liked these men. It broke them gently, reminding them creation demanded loss as surely as tide followed moon. Halen started keeping a new ledger. Nothing about profit, only names of workers and what they'd built that week. He said a name written for labor, not debt, sanctified both. Oren forged a bell from scraps of the old warehouse roof. When struck, it sang low and mournful, a note carried far downstream where stories once turned to ash. Each evening they rang it at sunset. The sound told every listener that another day had been redeemed from the weight of history, one plank closer to forgiveness carved in wood. Travelers began docking again. They found an honest harbor guarded by men who asked only fair prices and silent respect. The Delta breathed differently now, slower, steadier, as if healed. Still, rumors lingered. Some claimed a figure was seen upriver, a wanderer tracing vanished routes, perhaps Gareth's ghost, or merely Consequence still walking until the current forgave him too. Halen never denied the tales. "If he walks," he said, "let him see what we've done. Let him know the river's no longer chained to his mistakes." The workers nodded quietly. Seasons changed. The bell rusted, but its tone deepened, echoing across fog like a heartbeat too large for one chest. Children born on the docks grew up knowing only honesty. Oren grew older, beard silvered by sawdust, yet every morning he touched the bell before work, murmuring the same phrase, "To remember without repeating." It became the harbor's creed. One winter dawn, ice glazed the river, trapping barges in place. The men used the pause to carve a tablet listing the names of the 3 founders and one word beneath: forgiven. No preacher blessed it, no law sanctioned it. Yet when sunlight struck the stone, even skeptics felt the air loosen, as if guilt itself had exhaled for the first time. Elias died that spring, found in his chair facing the current. They buried him beside the dock under a simple board etched with an oar and the word keeper. Halen took his post, not as warden but witness, greeting every ship with the same calm voice. Welcome to the Delta, where the river gives back what men tried to steal. Visitors sensed reverence here. They lowered their voices, paid fare, and left offerings of rope or coin at the base of the bell, as if appeasing some benevolent spirit of balance. At night, the wind carried distant harmonies, creaks of rigging blending with waves against hulls, a symphony of labor and redemption orchestrated by countless hands that believed in second beginnings. Oren often stood beside Halen then, staring across the black water, murmuring, "Do you think they'd recognize this place?" Halen answered, "Only if they ever meant to build something real." Years drifted like slow cargo. The harbor prospered modestly, avoiding wealth's poison. Men came to learn, left changed, carrying fragments of integrity upriver like seeds scattered into future soil. Halen wrote fewer entries as time passed. His final page read simply, "The debt is settled. The current holds no anger." He closed the book and stored it under the bell. The river kept moving, indifferent yet gentler somehow. Its surface reflecting lanterns like stars returned to earth. Each ripple a story retold without shame. Each tide another lesson kept honest. And so the sons of the Delta built what their fathers could not, a brotherhood resilient enough to survive truth. The river no longer whispered of vengeance, only of balance restored. When storms came again, they stood together on the docks, eyes steady against lightning, hearts beating with the knowledge that redemption, once earned, is never entirely washed away. By dawn, the rain eased, sunlight breaking through low clouds, illuminating a harbor reborn from ruin. Halen lifted his gaze and smiled, whispering to the wind, "We've given the river back." The current answered with quiet applause against the pilings, as if acknowledging the covenant renewed between man and water, between legacy and mercy, between memory and the possibility of peace. And in that soft applause, every man heard his own father's voice forgiven at last, carried downstream into history, leaving only the sound of work, faith, and unbroken brotherhood behind. The fog came early that morning, rolling off the river like breath from an unseen beast settling over Willow Creek and the skeleton remains of the old Delta docks. Halen stood alone where the planks met water, the air cold enough to sting his lungs, as though the river wanted one final conversation before winter sealed its mouth shut. Around him the world was quiet, except for ropes creaking against wooden posts and the soft slap of current against the hulls of moored boats, half swallowed by mist. He had aged with the harbor silver in his beard shoulders, bowed by labor, yet there remained a steadiness in his eyes that time had learned to respect. Behind him, Oren approached slower now, his joints complaining against the morning chill, his hands wrapped around a tin mug that steamed faintly like a breath still fighting. "You knew I'd find you here," Oren said, voice coarse with sleep and memory. Halen smiled faintly. "You always follow the sound of the river when it calls." They said nothing for a while, letting silence stretch between them until even the wind seemed to pause, listening for whatever words might finally close the story. Halen broke it first. "It's ending, you feel it too, don't you? The current losing strength, the docks settling like old bones ready for their rest." Oren nodded, gazing toward the faint shape of the bell that had not been rung in months, its metal darkened from rain, its purpose fulfilled without ceremony. "The river's calmer than I've ever seen," he murmured, as if it forgave us when we stopped trying to own it. His breath turned white and vanished instantly. They walked together down the pier boards, groaning beneath their weight, each step echoing through years of effort, promises, and ghosts that had grown quiet with acceptance. Halfway down, they found the carved tablet still standing, though moss had crept across the names, dulling the word forgiven, until it looked like part of the wood itself. Oren traced the grooves with a trembling finger, feeling the indentations like scars that no longer hurt, but refused to fade entirely from skin or conscience. "I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting," he said, "but maybe it just means living long enough to understand why they failed." The wind answered with gentle agreement. Halen crouched beside him, brushing away moss. "They built with greed, we rebuilt with guilt. Neither was pure, but both were human. That's all the river ever asked of us." A gull screamed above, circling the fog, its shadow slicing briefly through light like a memory returning only to confirm that it no longer mattered who had won. Further inland, the town still slept the new generation, unaware of the stories buried beneath cobblestones and trade routes, their lives built unknowingly upon redemption's foundation. Halen exhaled softly. "Let them forget it's better that way. A harbor should remember labor, not legend." Oren smiled. "You always feared stories more than storms." They reached the end of the dock, where water lapped higher now, the river swollen from autumn rain, pushing softly against their boots, as if urging them onward. From his coat, Halen withdrew a small wooden box bound by twine, weathered smooth from years of carrying the last ledger, he said. "The one we never opened." Oren raised a brow. "After all this time, you still kept it?" Halen nodded. "Not for numbers, for names written but never spoken again. They deserve water, not shelves." Together they untied the box and lifted its lid. Inside lay pages, brittle but legible, their ink faded to sepia veins, across parchment still smelling faintly of smoke. They read in silence until dawn's first light slipped through the mist, gilding the words like confession, illuminated scripture written by men too proud to pray. Then, without ceremony, they tore the pages free one by one, letting the river take them each sheet, floating briefly before sinking slow into memory's cold mercy. Oren watched until the last fragment vanished. "Do you think they'll find peace now?" Halen replied, "Only if peace means being remembered honestly, not perfectly." The wind shifted, carrying the faint chime of the distant bell, though no one had struck it, its tone deeper now, older, resonating through fog like the river's heartbeat. Halen closed his eyes, listening. "That sound," he whispered, "it's calling them home. The fathers, the partners, the ones who thought the current belonged to them." Oren placed a hand on his shoulder. "And us?" Halen smiled. "We stay. We keep watch until it forgets us too. Then maybe we'll have earned silence." They stood side by side as light burned away the fog, revealing the wide expanse of water, endless, unclaimed, infinite, the same river yet somehow transformed. A fisherman's horn sounded from downstream, announcing another day of work, ordinary and sacred, the rhythm of men who built without needing to conquer what they built upon. Halen took a slow breath. "It feels right ending here where it began, not with shouting or gunfire, but with the river simply continuing." Oren nodded wordless agreement. He reached for the bell rope and gave a gentle pull, once just enough to send a low vibration across the water, a farewell rather than a summons. The sound rolled outward, meeting the wind, carrying with it a message older than forgiveness, that even ruin can teach men how to build again. They watched ripples spread until the river swallowed the last tremor, then turned back toward town, where smoke from chimneys promised warmth work and another ordinary day. At the hill's edge, they paused one last time to look upon Willow Creek, now bathed in sunlight, its surface shimmering like a mirror, refusing to show the past. Halen said quietly, "If they ask what happened, tell them the river changed course, nothing more, that's all history ever is, water finding new direction." Oren chuckled. and us old men caught watching it happen too slowly. Halen smiled. That's enough we were the witnesses, that's all any brother could be. By midday, they reached the rebuilt square where children chased dogs, and traders shouted prices unaware their laughter was the loudest prayer the Delta had ever heard. The bell rang once more, carried by wind, not rope, perhaps by echo, perhaps by gratitude. Neither man turned to see which, only nodded and kept walking. That evening the river rose again, gentle and patient, sweeping through the reeds around the dock, touching the carved tablet one final time before covering it completely. No storm followed, only stillness, as if nature itself signed the final page of a story written in sweat repentance and the stubborn endurance of men seeking balance. When darkness fell, lights from the town reflected upon the water, shimmering like lanterns offered to unseen travelers, guiding them home across the calm, unbroken current. And somewhere beneath that current, deep and unseen, the last echoes of names dissolved into silence, leaving behind only the sound of the river breathing and beginning again.